Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 60 of Journey into Legends. Today we are going to be reading Tales from the Empire. Tales from the Empire is another collection of short stories. Unlike previous Tales books, this book collects various short stories from the adventure journals. I'm pretty excited to get back into some short stories. It's been a while, so without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, so the first story we have is called First Contact by Timothy Zahn, and it was taken from Adventure Journal number 1. First Contact tells the story of how Talon Card first met Mara Jade and how she joined his organization. Personally, although it took a while to get where it needed to be, and was, for the most part, just a little story about Talon Card on the planet Veronat, I quite enjoyed this story. Talon Card is always a very fun character to read about, and I enjoyed the adventure he went on in this story. I also really enjoyed the planet Veronat and thought it was an interesting setting. Although I would have enjoyed if Zahn put a bit more focus on Card's first time meeting Mara. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. Alright, so our second story is called Tinian on Trial by Kathy Tyers, and it comes from Adventure Journal number 4. This story marks the first appearance of the character Tinian Ayat, a character who I was first introduced to in Bosk's story from Tales of the Bounty Hunters. Personally, this story wasn't anything special. Tinian is a very boring character and doesn't really serve a purpose. Once again, Kathy Tyers' writing is very bland and turned what could have been a decent story into a bit of a slog. Overall, I'm just struggling to understand the importance of this story and why it was even included in this collection at all. Anyways, let's move on to our next story. Alright, so our third story is called The Final Exit by Patricia A. Jackson, and it was originally written for Adventure Journal number 4. This story follows a pilot named Thaddeus Ross as he takes on a charter job to bring a mysterious dark Jedi named Adalric Brandel to the planet True Lawless. I actually really enjoyed this story. Adalric Brandel was a really intriguing character, and I enjoyed his interactions with Captain Ross. So far, this is actually my favorite story of the book. I enjoyed that it featured exclusively original characters, and I thought it was fairly well written. Anyways, let's move on to the fourth story. Alright, so our next story is called Missed Chance by Michael Stackpole, and it's from Adventure Journal number 7. For the most part, this story was just your average Empire versus Rebellion story, with the Empire ruling a planet, arresting and interrogating some rebels, yada yada yada. But I really started to like this story when an Imperial named Iman Yazali started scheming to take down the rebels by pretending to be on their side. Then this story got even better when it was revealed that Iman was actually Cornhorn in disguise, especially because this was actually Cornhorn's first ever appearance in the EU. Overall, this story was a bit too long and nothing much happened for the most part, but by the end I really ended up enjoying it. Also from Adventure Journal number 7 is Retreat from Coruscant by Laurie Burns. And this one is about a courier named Taryn Clancy who is tasked with sending a message to New Republic sector fleets about an Imperial invasion of Coruscant. Personally, I found this story to be pretty good, albeit a bit disappointing. I thought that the premise had potential to be quite riveting and suspenseful, and at certain points it was, like when the crew got inspected by an Imperial boarding crew. But for the most part, this story was a bit boring. I had no interest in any of the characters, and the timeline placement is a bit confusing. Apparently this takes place right after the Thrawn trilogy, so I guess the Imperial invasion is set up for Dark Empire, although they didn't really make it very clear. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. Alright, so our next story comes from Adventure Journal number 8 and is called A Certain Point of View by Charlene Newcomb. This one follows Celia DeRasha, the navigator of a luxury liner called the Kuwari Princess. In this story, an old flame of Celia's, now an Imperial Lieutenant, Adian Lang, shows up on the ship and arrests Celia's friend and security chief, Dayton Kylil, who's suspected of smuggling weapons to the rebellion. Overall, I didn't really care for this story at all. This felt like just your average Imperial arrests rebel conspirator story, just retold with uninteresting, forgettable characters. The only thing I liked was some of the art from the original story in the Adventure Journal. The story itself, however, wasn't great. Alright, so our seventh story is called Blaze of Glory by Tony Russo, and it was originally written for Adventure Journal number 8. This story follows a crew of mercenaries called the Red Moons as they stop a slave ring on the planet Gabrador 3. And I actually really loved this story. Once again, we have another story with completely original characters, those characters being the absolute highlight of this story for me. Brixie Ergo, the team's young medic, Hugo Cutter, the team's demolitionist/nervous wreck, Sully Tiger Eye, the team's no-nonsense leader, and my personal favorite, Lex Kempo, the team's pilot, who is a really fun and charismatic character. I really love mercenary-type characters, and stories like these remind me why. The plot itself is extremely simple, but the characters made this one a blast to read. I also really liked that the main thread of this story wasn't just your average Imperials. It was the Pentastar Alignment, an Imperial-adjacent faction that gets far too little attention in the EU, so it was great to see it here. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. Alright, so our next story is called Slaying Dragons by Angela Phillips, from Adventure Journal number 9. This one follows a young girl named Shannon Vorson as her cousin Dean comes home and inspires her to join the rebellion. This one was pretty boring and could have benefited from being a little bit longer. None of the characters felt fleshed out enough, and the pace was a bit too quick to really care about what was happening. Overall, it's not the worst story in the world, but the short length really held it back. Our second to last story is called Do No Harm by Aaron Andom from Adventure Journal number 10. And this one follows a rebel medic named Auren Lath as she goes on a mission to rescue a rebel prisoner that she might have to kill, which comes at odds with the oath she swore to, do no harm. Overall, this story was fine, but it lacked stakes. I would have found this story much more enjoyable if at least one of the characters died, or if there were more consequences at all. From the very beginning, it felt like the prison break was going too smoothly, and other than a short tussle with some stormtroopers, that never changed. They got in, rescued their rebel friend, and got out. In the end, the only consequence was that our main character, the Doctor, had to kill a stormtrooper and felt a bit guilty about it. Anyways, let's move on to our 10th and final story. Alright, our last story, our big main event, is a mini-novel called Side Trip by Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole, released in 4 parts in Adventure Journals 12 and 13. And this was a very dense story, so I couldn't really explain the plot without dedicating an entire review to it. In short, this story follows a group of traders hired to deliver cargo to Corellia, and they are accompanied by the bounty hunter Jodo Kast. It turns out that under the helmet, Kast is actually Grand Admiral Thrawn in disguise, who orchestrated the entire mission to catch Zeka Thine and find the rebel base at Dara 4. Overall, this story was a lot of fun. It was great seeing Corran Horn and his father work together for Coruscant. It was also really cool to see the moment Vader gifts Thrawn the Nogri. And it was also great to see Thrawn at work again, and I especially enjoyed seeing his plan come to fruition and how masterfully he pulled all the strings. I only wish that they didn't reveal it was Thrawn under the helmet until the very end. Overall, despite having a few really fun stories, this collection as a whole left a lot to be desired. Whereas the other Tales books felt like one larger story was being told, this one felt like a bunch of random short stories mashed together haphazardly, which is pretty much what actually happened. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll be reviewing the fan favorite novel I, Jedi by Michael Stackpole. See ya.